There is a myth around the sales profession that procurement has a single method of operating, namely consolidate volumes or spend, offer a package of business up to competing suppliers, negotiate and then agree a contract with the lowest bidder. It's a convenient caricature in that it is undemanding for the average salesperson. The process is understood to be out of the seller's control, and unless the supplier has the best price, it is unlikely to win against hungrier competitors. However, this perception is misplaced, and it will be the curious and proactive salesperson who will gain the forensic insight into the range of sourcing strategies procurement employs, and who will then develop the necessary appropriate sales responses that more accurately reflect the customer's interests and expectations. The fact of the matter is that procurement strategies are not created equal. How a category of spend is classified by procurement will have a profound effect on the approach it takes to how it sources and how it manages relationships with suppliers. In this video, I will explain the procurement tool portfolio analysis and how it works, and at the end of the module, viewers will be able to better position their products and service offerings on each of the portfolio matrices of their key customers. Viewers should then have the means to diagnose the likely strategy procurement will deploy in their relations and lay the groundwork for how best to respond. So let's look at the tool procurement uses to determine its range of sourcing strategies, portfolio analysis. This is unquestionably the most used model in the procurement toolbox. It was originally developed by an academic and consultant named Peter Kralich and published in the Harvard Business Review some 35 years ago. Before we dive in, it is worth reflecting on why this tool is apparently more important than what account managers typically assume is the core activity of procurement, namely negotiation. Negotiation skills are vitally important for anyone in a commercial role, be them buyers or sellers. What goes on in the negotiating room can dramatically shift the results of a deal one way or the other, and being able to flex and respond to what the other party is saying is a core interpersonal skill. However, what goes on before the parties enter the negotiating room has proven to be even more important in determining the outcome, and this is where procurement's portfolio analysis comes in. Procurement uses portfolio analysis for three main reasons. 1. To set priorities for which spend categories to address first. 2. Where to deploy people, and this usually involves putting the most capable category managers onto category projects that show the most value improving promise. And 3. To help design the most appropriate strategies for each priority category of spend. You will recall category planning from an earlier video in this series. That is the annual planning and priority setting undertaken by CPOs and their teams. To the busy CPO, having clarity of which categories are to be subjected to strategic review in the year is essential. It is a waste of effort to consider each spend category as equally worthy of attention, and so they don't do it. In a given year, CPO may expect to renew category strategies for up to 30% of their categories, and these will be part of a rolling program designed to ensure that 80% of procurement spend will be demonstrably under control. The main focus will be on the categories that have the highest business impact. For example, in an automotive assembly operation, the engine system will be amongst the largest spend categories, assuming it is sourced from a third-party supplier, whilst at the other end of the spend or business impact spectrum will be the adhesive labeling that goes inside a car's glove compartment. More examples will follow. Once the priority categories have been identified, the CPO will then be able to assign the most capable category managers to those most critical categories, with less experienced team members assigned to items that are, frankly, less important to the business. Portfolio analysis is more than an aid in setting priorities for the procurement team. The competent use of the tool prescribes the most appropriate sourcing and relationship management strategies for the procurement team. Depending on which of the four quadrants that makes up the tool, radically different approaches can be taken towards the supply market, a fact that is largely invisible to suppliers, salespeople and account managers. Procurement places each category in its position on the horizontal axis of the matrix, with the top spend items placed to the right on the low to high spend scale and the lower spend items to the left. Turning attention to the challenges the supply chain imposes, the CPO will then, using commercial and supply risk characteristics, determine the degree of difficulty associated with each category and assign a position for them on the low to high scale. Typically, difficult supply markets are often associated with monopoly or limited supplier choice, with bespoke product or service specifications also potentially leading to high levels of difficulty. Supply markets of low difficulty are usually characterized by the buyer having the choice of many competing suppliers, helped also by generic product specifications. The relationship between spend and risk or difficulty enables the CPO to position the category within the relevant quadrant on the matrix. Let's start with categories that would be placed in the lower left quadrant, low in relative spend and low in market difficulty. These are classified as transactional categories. Typically, these might be the low cost or low value purchases that don't excite the CPO. For a financial services institution, it might be a one-off piece of training for a small group of back office staff. For a car assembler, it could be basic office supplies or standard fastenings for use under the bonnet. For procurement, the prescription for such low value or low difficulty spend categories is to minimize procurement effort, create standard specifications that several suppliers can meet, simplify order processes, ideally automate them or outsource to a supply integrator, a large supplier who will coordinate a lot of small spend categories. For procurement, noise reduction is a priority, and it is usually not interested in engaging or developing a relationship with suppliers in this quadrant, usually placing a relatively inexperienced buyer to oversee the category. Suppliers finding their services classified by the customer as transactional will often tell tales of woe over not being able to gain access to procurement, never mind senior decision makers in the customer's business. In the upper left quadrant are spend categories that are relatively low spend for the customer but problematic for procurement in that there are few suppliers that can meet the demand. Procurement term these categories as bottleneck, or sometimes referring to them as critical. Strategy consulting might be a good example of a spend category that sits in this quadrant, a short to medium term contract with a specialist consultancy. The impact of the consultant's work could be significant, but strategy consulting is in no way the core business of, for instance, a local government council or perhaps a logistics service provider. In the tech sector, it could be a piece of bespoke software sourced from a single supplier. Unique specifications and extreme limits on the choice of suppliers can generate much frustration for the category manager looking to improve the value secured from the category. Suppliers in this quadrant are very likely to have direct relationships with technical specifiers or budget holders, with procurement having limited influence. Under this classification, procurement will primarily be motivated to manage commercial and supplier risk, which may include strenuous efforts to introduce alternative suppliers to the business. The salesperson's relationship with procurement in this situation is often challenging, characterized by suspicion that the customer is being taken advantage of. In contrast to bottleneck, procurement really enjoys working on spend categories in the leverage quadrant. Here, procurement is able to enjoy wide supplier choice and, due to relatively high spend, is frequently able to flex its muscles through the use of competitive tendering and reverse auctions. For a large grocery business like a major supplier, a leverage category would be high volume, unbranded goods such as milk, fruit and veg, and bakery. For a car assembler, then wheels and tyres could be good examples. The great advantage for procurement of having leverage categories is that the suppliers do most of the work. Competing suppliers chase the customer's business, frequently offering large discounts in order to secure the business. Procurement people operating in leverage display archetypal buyer behavior, concentrating spend volumes, tender-based processes, aggressive negotiation, demands for cost transparency, and arm's-length relationship management. It's a suite of behaviors instantly recognizable by those in sales, and it makes for a tough sell. The overwhelming priority for procurement here is to make savings, and woe betide the salesperson who is unable to meet that demand. Finally, the strategic quadrant is the realm of partnership working where collaboration and long-term contracts are commonplace. These categories represent high spend yet high difficulty, where relationships are codependent, important for both the customer and for the supplier. For a civil aerospace company, the supply of aero engines would be an excellent example. For a bank, IT services would fall into this classification. Procurement will be leading, or at least part of, a cross-functional team in managing the category and suppliers, and senior executives are likely to take an interest. The focus on value is typically strong here, although cost savings will almost always feature strongly. Suppliers can expect to have a full agenda of value improvement initiatives on their plate. Indeed, continuous value improvement is the name of the game in relationships that fall under the strategic classification. So, 4 distinct strategic options open to procurement depending on the importance placed on each spend category. Suppliers often tend to inflate their own importance in the life of their customers. This is most likely because they naturally have a superior understanding of the value they can potentially bring to the customer. And they're specialists with deep knowledge of products and services. As I've mentioned previously, they're selling to generalists in procurement. But it is certain that not all categories can be placed in the strategic box. Indeed, I would suggest most suppliers are providing products and services that are in the transactional quadrant. It is perhaps a sobering message to many salespeople. However, suppliers can respond with relational and negotiation approaches that better align with their customers' own classification of the categories they support and be more successful. In the next video, I will explain what those strategies could be. In the meantime, things to remember. Firstly, procurement has a range of strategy options when it comes to sourcing and supplier management. There isn't one strategy that fits all circumstances. Knowing how your category is positioned by your customer, and that positioning will be different for each customer, can give the supplier an advantage when compared to a competitor who is oblivious to procurement's professional methods.